Hi, my name is James. Today I'm going to show you how to build this kiln. This is a kiln that holds 1,000 board feet of lumber, and it includes all the electronics and hardware, everything that you need to make the kiln work for you. And it's every bit as good, just as efficient, and works just as well as a professional kiln. But it's a small fraction of the price, maybe a tenth of the price. And I'm going to show you today, step by step, exactly how to make one for yourself, if that's something that you have interest in. So stay tuned. If you like our content and the things that we do, we would really appreciate it if you took the time to subscribe to the channel. You can click the button down below, and you can even push that notification bell to get notified when we have new videos come out. So this is actually going to be a professional kiln. This is not just a typical homemade backyard job. This is a kiln that's every bit as efficient and professional as a $20,000 kiln for probably a 20th of the price. Now I'm going to show you exactly how. In the Wood Handbook, which is put out by the U.S. Forest Products Laboratory, it tells us that we need an R value of 20 for a kiln. It says in cold climates in the winter, you could need an R value as high as 30. So I have decided to make mine out of 4-inch thick walls so I can get 4-inch thick foam insulation, and that would give me an R value with the wood that I have on the outside of about 28. And that's going to be what we did. We had to take 2x6s and rip them down to this, but that was the choice I made to do that and have a very insulated wall. I'm going to have exact plans for this, including all the electronics and exactly how we did everything. In the description down below will be a link to get that if you're interested. As for the insulation, you can get that for really, really cheap. We got our insulation on Facebook Marketplace, and if you go to Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist where you live, you will see tons and tons of people selling it. A lot of it is older insulation, and the price is really cheap, and if you can get that, I would get it because it doesn't really go bad. And it's half the price or a quarter of the price or even less sometimes than going and buying it new. I think if you were to buy all the insulation for this new and you buy the high-end stuff, you'd probably spend $500 in insulation. And I think we spent probably $200 in insulation. So it's a really big difference. And so I'm putting 4 inches of insulation, and I always recommend getting more rather than less because that means it takes less energy to heat it. It will keep the temperature inside of it more stable. Your wood will be dried better. You'll have a more equalized temperature throughout the kiln. Everything is better when you have more insulation. I see so many people on YouTube, they're building kilns and they're talking about how to do it, and they're going to the home centers and they're buying like 1-inch thick foam and taping it together. And the stuff they're getting like an EPS foam, which is expanded or extruded polystyrene foam, and that stuff has a very, very low R value. An inch of that only has an R value of about 3. So it's completely useless. It's the same as leaving the wood out in the air because there's no way, that they can get a heater that has enough power to heat that, because the heat loss would be tremendous through the walls, right through the foam itself, because the foam just doesn't have a high enough R value. And EPS foam doesn't even work for a kiln. So EPS there's 2 types really, extruded polystyrene or expanded polystyrene, and that's not going to work because it won't handle high temperatures. And one key important thing for a kiln is at the end you've got to bring the temperature up to about 160 degrees for a day. You need to do that in order to sterilize, or what they call sterilize, the lumber. That kills any bugs off, kills insects, bacteria, fungi, even wood viruses, anything that might be in there that's alive. It's going to kill it and make the wood safe for indoors, and not allow anything to continue attacking the wood. In fact, without having a kiln and actually heating the wood to the proper temperature, you cannot even get the wood down to the right moisture content to be safe to use in your home. It's going to crack and check and break apart otherwise. They've done lots of studies, and the average indoor humidity in homes all across North America is between 30 and 50%, with 40 pretty much being the average. And a humidity of 40% at the 77 degrees, which is the average temperature of those homes, translates to an equilibrium moisture content in the wood of 7.7%. So you've got to be between 6 and 8% with your wood in order to use it inside of a home without fear that your wood is going to self-destruct. And you cannot reach 7% by air drying the wood. You can't reach 7% by trying to dry wood in a kiln with 1/2 inch thick or 1 inch thick or 1.5 inch thick walls. And you also cannot kill any bugs, bacteria, fungi, insects, or anything unless you heat the ambient air temperature in the kiln up close to 160 degrees. So a good kiln, a proper kiln, and a professional kiln is necessary. I guess to get back to what I was saying is, in order to get the wood down that low, you have to heat it, and you have to have it insulated very well in order to heat it. So you really need thicker stuff, and if you're going to bring it up to temperature, then expanded polystyrene and extruded polystyrene aren't good enough, because those get soft and melt at about 150 degrees. So you have to go with a film called polyiso. The full name is polyisocyanurate foam. And this foam, oftentimes, depending on what you get, is fireproof. It's also thermally regulated, so it will withstand a tremendous amount of heat. And this is the stuff that we got. It's a John's Manville foam. It doesn't really matter what you get. Just get a foam board and put it in there. And if it's foil coated, great. If it's not foil coated, that's okay too. It still has a high R value, and that's what matters. We had to get 2 pieces. It's not too hard to get this foam in 4-inch thickness, but we couldn't find a good value on that, so we got 2 pieces. So I did need to buy some polyurethane adhesive to glue these 2 pieces together. But it doesn't do anything with the R value. In fact, it's additive. So 2 pieces gives us the same R value as a single 4-inch piece. So you get whatever is economical for you. You need to cut it as tight as you can and get it forced down in there. So the polyiso foam, is what you need for a kiln. Polyiso foam. And then I'm putting aluminum tape around the edge of the foam because I kind of want my box to be close to airtight. So what I've done is I've built the wall panels. There's a left, a right, a top, and a back. This is the back we're putting in now. And then I've got 2 panels for the doors for the front. But I don't have a bottom panel. I'm sitting on concrete, and there's the rubber horse mat is down on top of that. This is a kind of our outdoor gym workout area, which obviously I need to get back to. You can see. I've been doing some workouts. I actually have lost 130 pounds in the last, probably a year. And I'm still working on it. And I still have an indoor gym, but I got to stick with it, of course. So, and here goes the top. All right, so at the bottom I just have that horse mat, and I'm just going to lay a couple of layers of foam on that. It would probably be okay to just ignore that and put my my wood there, but I know I'm going to get a better insulation if I put some foam down at the bottom, and I got a really good deal on it. So if you can seal your box on all 6 sides with this foam insulation, you're going to be in really good shape. And so I've taped all the joints. I've tried to make it practically airtight. And even at the top corners where the walls came together, I put a little bit of that spray expanding foam. A can of it's $5 and it didn't even take a can. So I would recommend doing these little things that don't cost a lot. And that gets you that much closer to having a professional kiln. And I've laid down some plywood on the bottom. Any 3/4 inch exterior plywood will work. I just only had some 1/2 inch left for the bottom, so I put 2 layers of it. But just a single layer of 3/4 would be great. And there's the box. And like I said, I do have full plans for this, including all of the electronics available, like links where to purchase them, stuff like that. So the plans are available if you're interested. There's a link to that in the description down below. You might notice we've got stickers placed every 12 inches. I've got a double sticker on bottom for a little bit more airflow. And we're going to go ahead and get the right door sealed on and talk about the electronics. So let's take a look here. You saw us with the lumber loaded, and I have the first door on in place. I do not have room in my little outdoor area here to put hinges on these doors because they would just swing too wide. And so I've screwed the first door in, and the second door will be latched on, and I'll show you how I do that. I have put some rubber stripping down here all around where this door is going to connect to this one. I did the same thing from this door to here, just to kind of keep it weather sealed and then keep the heat in. And then I put this piece of wood here. It's just braced in here because this had a tiny bit of sag to it. And I may want to put some weight up here for storage. I'm not sure, but that's why I've got this piece sitting here. So you can look inside and see there. and it's nowhere near full. I think this thing would hold 1,000 board feet if it was neatly stacked and it was all, say, 4/4 or 8/4 lumber, but we've got cookies, we've got a lot of odd shaped and sized things in here. So let's take a look at some of the electronics. So don't get overwhelmed. I have a lot more in here than you actually need, but I'm going to explain everything to you. Let's start with this. Okay, so this is a temperature probe, and this is a temperature probe. It's called a K-type thermocouple that plugs into a unit on the outside, and I'll show you exactly how that works. The dry bulb temperature in kilns is always just the ambient air temperature, which is what this measures. The wet bulb temperature is you have a wick dipped in water, and it wicks water up to the bulb that looks just like this, and the water evaporates off of here, and that evaporation actually cools down the temperature bulb, the readout. So this temperature bulb, the wet bulb, is going to read at a lower temperature than the dry bulb because of evaporation. This is important, and this is a component of all professional kilns, because the two of these in combination help you understand what the humidity is doing inside of here. So let's say, for example, inside of here is extremely humid. We're at the beginning of our cycle, and I've got the heaters going and the fans are going, and they're pulling moisture out of this wood really rapidly. When that's occurring, we have a lot of humidity in here. If this is a very humid area, then the water is not going to evaporate off of this bulb very fast. So if it doesn't evaporate very fast off the bulb, it's not going to cool the bulb temperature down very much. Conversely, if it begins to get very dry in here, after a period of time, when most of the moisture gets out of the wood, it gets drier and drier. Then when the area in here is drier, then the water will evaporate much faster off of the bulb at a much higher rate. And a higher rate of evaporation means more energy is being pulled out of the bulb, which means more heat is being pulled out of the bulb, so the bulb will have a lower and lower temperature. So it's the difference between the dry bulb and the wet bulb, which is the difference between the ambient air temperature and what the humidity is doing. That tells us how humid it is in here. And the closer these two, the closer the wood gets to being dry, the bigger the spread and temperature difference between these two. And I'll explain that in a future video if you decide to do this as we get a little closer to our lumber being dry, and I'll explain the mechanics behind it and the numbers that you need to look for. This is extremely easy to put together. These two K-type thermocouples in the reader that's on the other side cost $6 on Amazon. They're extremely cheap. This is a Tabasco bottle. I actually bought a brand new one on Amazon. You can buy them in a 6-pack, and I think they're about $10. And you see that's the tip to the bottle. It has a hole in it naturally because it's like a Tabasco bottle. But we just put that there, so water isn't just going to evaporate off of here rapidly by itself because the opening is really small. So this is just the perfect thing to have. And I just built a little stand for this out of wood and screwed it in. It's just that simple. And then I've got, I put some tape down. I put a little staple here, a couple staples there, and put some tape over it. But that's real simple. So I've got the dry bulb and the wet bulb temp. So before we look at anything else, let's go around the outside and take a look at this. So they're coming out of the wall right here. And this is the reading. And I just made notes for myself that the dry bulb is up here and the wet bulb is here. So this is measuring the ambient air temperature, which is 61. I had the heater going right in front of it, so it's a teeny bit hotter than what it actually is in there. And the wet bulb is reading 50. So naturally the wet bulb is lower than the dry bulb, and that's because water is wicking up there and then it's evaporating off of the bulb, which is causing the temperature to go down. So it's these two readings that matter. This is just an extremely simple little gadget that you buy on Amazon. It's so cheap for these things. So, and I guess what I should say is you don't actually have to have this. It's not necessary. You can simply put a kiln together, stick a fan and a heater in there and a dehumidifier, and you're going to dry your lumber. The problem with that is you're not going to know exactly when your lumber is dry. Maybe your lumber is going to be dry in 4 weeks, but you don't know, so you're leaving your lumber in for 6 weeks or 8 weeks or something like that. You can obviously open it, check it with your moisture meter for your wood, or even cut into the wood and check that way. But this way I'm going to know for sure. because the mathematics of it will help me calculate that. All right, so this is this component, which of course not necessary, but I think with that little bottle and all this, I didn't even spend $10 on it. So it's something that's worth getting. You know, you might want to get your kiln to be a little more sophisticated later. So it's something you should consider, at least. This is the difference between most amateur kilns and professional kilns, is having a wet bulb and a dry bulb reader inside of the kiln. All right, let's take a look at some of the other stuff we got. Okay, so this is just a temperature probe hanging here, and this goes to a thermostat. And that thermostat is hooked down here to the heater. The heater is plugged into the thermostat. So I'll always have the heater left on high, and let's come outside and take a look at this. So that comes out right here, and it goes down into this thermostat. So I have the temperature set on 100. I'm going to start at a fairly mild temperature. And right now it's reading 55.8, where that probe is. And the heater's going to come on until this reaches 100. And then when it reaches 100, the heater's going to turn off. And the temperature will drop. When it drops to 98, because I have a 2-degree differential set, it's going to heat back up to 100. You buy this on Amazon too, this thermostat. Very, very simple, not very expensive at all. And then the heater plugs in right here into the thermostat. And the thermostat, of course, gets its power because it plugs into the power strip. And that's it. That's the whole mechanism behind the thermostat. Turns the heater on when it's too cold, turns the heater off when it's too hot. Super simple. You don't necessarily have to have this, but I'd spend the 20 bucks on it. You could just come out here and put a thermometer in there and turn the heater on when you need to and turn it off when you need to. If it gets a little too hot, that's okay. But for me, that's handy. All right, let's take a look at a couple more things. Now this part is a little bit redundant. Look down here. This is a temperature and humidity probe. Just have it hanging here. I have one more just like it all the way at the back for redundancy. And let's see what that does. So that connects to this hub wirelessly and transmits the data to this. So right now, this is showing between the two of those, we're getting 54 degrees Fahrenheit and an average of 46% humidity inside of the box, which is, you know, the whole area here, because the box isn't sealed. And you don't need this at all. It's not a ton of money. I think it was 20 bucks for this, and a probe. But I like it because this connects to my phone and it connects to Alexa. So I can be inside of my house and I can just pull up my phone and I can say, Alexa, what's the temperature inside of my kiln? And I'll know. So that's handy. I don't have to walk out here. It just transmits into my house. It does Bluetooth, or it transmits over my network here to Alexa. So either way, it's pretty handy. Again, just some redundancy, just something that I like, so I don't have to walk out to the kiln in the middle of winter and take a look at it and, you know, make sure everything's still going. If I look at it and there's something wrong, maybe the power's tripped and I got to come check it out. And then of course you have to have a power strip. And then of course you need a plug that comes over here, which I have up here, a cord. Power strip plugs into a cord. And that's really it. It's no more complicated than that. These holes here I have for a different reason. I have them plugged now because I'm not using them yet. Let's go back in here and you can see them on the inside as well. I have the insulation still plugged back in there. They're 4-inch ports. What I'm going to do is what you have to do with all kilns is you're going to kiln dry it. You're going to run a dehumidifier. You're going to kiln dry it. And when your wood is virtually dry, then you're going to turn up the temperature. I'm going to gradually increase the temperature a little bit anyway because it's going to start slowing down. But towards the end, then I have to do what's called sterilizing the wood. If you're a scientist, you know it's not going to become sterile. But what that means is you're going to kill the bugs. And by bugs, we mean bacteria, any viruses that might be in the wood, and mold or fungus, and insects that might be in the wood. We had insects in this, if you recall from the video last week. There were wood boring insects, and if there's any in there, it'll kill them. And the U.S. Forest Service has a wood products research laboratory, and they tell us that we need to get the ambient temperature in the kiln to about 160 degrees. And by doing that, that puts the temperature of the inside core of the wood at about 130. And it's got to stay at 130 for at least 1 hour in order to kill all the bugs inside of the wood. So I would probably leave it for a day, and there's no harm for leaving it for longer. I was just telling you the minimum. If you're a commercial producer, then you don't want to spend any more time in the kiln than you have to, so you would probably minimize that time. But I'll get it up to temp and leave it there for a day. And so that's important to have. No matter what you have, you do want to kill the bugs. So you want to be able to get the temperature up, and this heater will easily do it. It's also a fairly cheap heater. You can also buy commercial heaters. And then you have to have a fan. The fan's just always plugged in out there because a fan is going to keep this air circulated in here. And then, of course, look back here. That is the dehumidifier. So a dehumidifier is important as well. Now, I have a commercial dehumidifier, so it's a little bit more money, but you can just get a regular household dehumidifier. It doesn't have to be a very expensive or high-powered unit. But a dehumidifier is critical. Dehumidifier is going to pull the humidity out of the wood, or I guess primarily out of the air, and then the air is going to be dry. And that dry air is going to want to pull humidity out of the wood. The water in the wood is going to want to go somewhere. It's going to go into the air, and the dehumidifier is going to take it out of the air, and the whole cycle is going to continue until the wood gets down to the correct humidity. We want to be between 6 and 8% for furniture. That's impossible to get with air drying, but it's easy with a dehumidifier and some heat. So at a minimum, you'll need a fan for circulation, you'll need a heater, and you'll need a dehumidifier. Those three components are really important, and I would suggest getting that thermostat unit that I have out front also. This is optional, although this is the cheapest little bit of electronics that you could put in, but that's certainly optional. You wouldn't have to have that. And you certainly wouldn't have to have these electronic temperature and humidity sensors, but I thought that was convenient. It gives me a lot of redundancy. So if one thermometer fails or one, then I know. I've got one here, one in the back, that's 2, this is 3, 4, 5. I'm reading the temperature 5 different ways in here. Just one's fine, but I have a little bit of redundancy built in there, which is always nice. So you know what the minimum is required, and that's all that's important. Okay, so let's talk about packing the wood in here. So what's important is that, number one, it gets strapped down. These straps are extremely tight. These are, I think, 6,000-pound straps. You can get something probably a little bit weaker, but I've got 3 straps holding it down. If you don't have straps holding this down, and you don't have these stickers placed uniformly, then when your wood dries, it could very likely warp. And you don't want that. You want the wood to stay as flat as possible. So strapping it down everywhere holds it tight and prevents the warp. Then you'll need stickers. I've got stickers every foot across there, which gives us this air gap in here everywhere, so air can flow through and it can dry. When you make stickers, a lot of people make them out of this wood here as you're cutting the tree down, but don't. Get dry wood for stickers. If you have wet wood for stickers, it's going to stain where they contact the wood. So you're going to have stained lumber. So always get dry wood for your stickers. That's important. And then the other thing that's probably important to note is that I have stickers between here, but because I have these straps compressing it, I don't want it to compress this wood together and leave no gap. So if you can come around here and look underneath, you might be able to see that I have little gaps of wood here between the stickers. I have little gaps of wood between the stickers, and that doesn't allow these pieces of wood to come together and close off the air circulation. So that's important to have those two. Just little pieces. They'll sit on top of the stickers, a couple here and a couple there. That's enough to prevent these from collapsing together. And then another thing to note is that you probably have noticed that I have all different thicknesses of lumber in here. So there's a drawback to that, and that is that the amount of time this takes to dry is going to be equal to the amount of time it takes your thickest piece to dry. If I just had 4/4 lumber in here and nothing else, this whole kiln will probably be dry in 3 weeks. But if I had 8/4, it'd probably be 5 weeks. But I have huge thicknesses, so I might be in the kiln for 2.5 months. I'm not sure, 10, 11, 12 weeks even possibly, which is fine with me. But if you're a commercial establishment and had a commercial kiln and you're making money, then you're going to want to get your lumber turned over as fast as possible. So you're going to want to dry like things together. Dry all your 4/4 together, all your 8/4 together, all your really thick stuff together to minimize time, because all the time is wasted. All that extra time is wasted on this thinner stock, which could have been out of here faster. But since I'm just a hobbyist here, I don't really care how long it takes. Makes no difference. It will cause no harm to the thinner wood to sit in here for longer. And it's not going to get any drier because it's going to be as dry as the wettest piece in here. That's how kilns work. You know, if whatever it takes to get this down to 6, or say 7 or 8, this is going to be the same. This is not going to suddenly dry to 3% just because this took longer. Because the humidity is always constant in here, so they're all going to come down to the same humidity at the same time, which means the same internal moisture content, which is the equilibrium moisture content. So there's an equilibrium balance between the relative humidity inside of the box and the moisture content inside of the wood, and that's called the equilibrium moisture content. Then there's a chart made by the Forest Products Research Laboratory that tells you if the ambient humidity is this, then the moisture content in your wood will ultimately reach that. And it's very easy to read, a very fixed chart. And that's important to know. Okay, so with regard to these straps, I have them extremely tight, but as this wood shrinks, you know, in a week or two, these are going to be a little bit loose. So probably 3 or 4 times over the course of the drying, I'm going to have to come out here and just give them one more crank and tighten them up. And that's pretty standard with pretty much any kiln they have to do. Unfortunately for me, I'm going to have to unscrew this, but there's only about 5 or 6 screws holding that in place. If you had hinges, you really wouldn't have to worry about that, but I'll have to unscrew this, so it's going to take me, 10 minutes to pull the door off in order to crank these down. But, I don't mind doing that. If it takes that amount of time, I've got to do it 3 or 4 times during the dry cycle. It's not really a big deal. But you got to remember that. You got to crank these down as time goes on. I'm going to make some follow-up videos too as this progresses, and you guys will be able to see that a little more in depth. I'll probably take the time to explain some of the electronics a little more in depth and the importance of each of the components as well. So if you decide you want to do this, you can jump in and start building whenever you want. And then as I go along, this cycle is going to be probably ahead of whatever you're doing, and you'll be, you'll get the information that you might need or you might want, like with regards to the dry bulb and the wet bulb, long before you'll actually need it. So that's something to consider if you want to go ahead and build this. It works great. Insulation is a really important deal. I know I talked about that a little bit during the video. The Forest Products Research Laboratory, they recommend that you have an R20 at a minimum. And if you live in a cold winter climate and you leave these outdoors, they would prefer that it's an R30. I've seen a lot of people out there, unfortunately, make these, as I mentioned, out of much thinner types of insulation. And you're going to have so much heat loss that you're never going to get hot enough inside for it to work. It's just not going to happen. So this stuff is R13 for 2 inches, maybe 13.2, I think. I'm not quite sure. But I have 4 inches exactly, so that's about 26.5. And they say that 1/2-inch Baltic birch is an R.8. So collectively, I have about R27, which is pretty good, almost 30. And it's not going to get that cold in here. Wind is not going to be able to affect this because it's inside of our little gazebo enclosure, so it won't be quite as bad. But this is it's going to work just fine, I think. So, all right, let me get this door put on, and I'll show you how that works. All right, so everything is running, and I've got the door put in place here. Pretty cool here. Look at this. So it's hard to get these things up nice and snug against that, but that's what these are for. See, pull it up nice and tight. Same thing there. We'll come to this end. Come around here. Same thing here. I'll pull that tight. Pull that tight. Now it's sealed. Alright, so the kiln's complete. That's it. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.